Listen here, you overgrown gecko, Dr. Sarah Chen said, jabbing her finger at the 8-foot-tall Vexillian Admiral's chest scales. I don't care if you've got more medals than a Christmas tree has ornaments. Either you let me into that medical bay right now, or I'll show you exactly why human doctors took an oath to, first, do no harm. Because we're perfectly capable of doing lots of harm if we choose to. The Admiral's translator crackled as it processed her words, his inner eyelids flickering in what the xenologist had identified as either confusion or indigestion. With the Vexillians, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. But you hold no military rank. Admiral Cathex clicked, his ceremonial rank plates rattling as he drew himself up to his full height. Our protocols clearly state that only military personnel of equivalent or superior rank may countermand my orders regarding the quarantine. Sarah rolled her eyes so hard she probably sprained something. Yeah? Well, our protocols clearly state that when someone's bleeding out from a plasma burn, you let the damn doctor treat them before they die. But please, by all means, let's stand here and discuss bureaucracy while Lieutenant Rodriguez develops sepsis. I'm sure that'll look great in your report to the Joint Species Council. From his position by the sealed medical bay doors, Commander Steve Jackson tried, and failed, to suppress a grin. He'd seen that look in Dr. Chen's eyes before, back during the Proxima Centauri crisis. It was the same look she'd given the Marine captain who'd tried to stop her from treating civilians in the middle of an active firefight. The captain had ended up helping her carry medical supplies while apologizing profusely. The Vexillian Admiral's scales shifted from their usual iridescent blue to a mottled purple, their species equivalent of a nervous sweat. But the chain of command. Oh, for fuck's sake, Sarah muttered, pulling out her medical tablet. Commander Jackson, would you please explain to the Admiral what happens when he prevents medical personnel from doing their jobs? I'm a bit busy pulling up Section 47B of the Interspecies Medical Treaty that his government signed last year. Steve cleared his throat, schooling his features into something approaching diplomatic neutrality. Sir, with all due respect, you might want to step aside. When Doc Chen gets like this, even admirals tend to end up apologizing. But she's just a civilian doctor, Cathax protested, though he did take a small step back from Sarah's tablet-wielding advance. Sarah's laugh had the same warmth as liquid nitrogen. Honey, let me explain something about human medical professionals. We spend anywhere from 8 to 12 years learning every possible way the human body can fail, break, or die, just so we can prevent it from happening. We regularly cut people open, rearrange their insides, and sew them back up. We understand more ways to end a life than your entire military command structure. We just choose not to use that knowledge because we took an oath. She paused, tapping something on her tablet that made it emit an ominous beep. Also, fun fact, about 60% of human medical terminology comes from dead languages, which means I can literally curse you in words so old your translator won't even recognize them as language. Now, are you going to open this door, or do I need to start citing regulatory violations in alphabetical order? The Admiral's scales had progressed from purple to an alarming shade of green. His secondary breathing vents were starting to flutter. But the regulations... He tried one last time. Sarah's smile would have made a shark check its calendar for dentist appointments. Oh, good. You want to talk regulations? Let's talk about Regulation 23C, Paragraph 4, which states that in any medical emergency, the ranking medical officer has authority equal to a flag officer in matters pertaining to patient care. Would you like to guess who the ranking medical officer is on this station? You are? Cathax ventured, his tail starting to curl defensively. Give the Admiral a gold star. Now, would you like to discuss the 18 violations of medical protocols I've documented in the last 3 minutes? Or would you prefer to open this door and let me do my job? The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss before she'd even finished speaking. Excellent choice, Sarah said, already moving past him with her medical kit in hand. Commander Jackson, please inform the Admiral's staff that I'll need full access to the medical database and any xenobiological records they have on human Vexillian plasma burn interactions. And somebody get me some coffee, the good stuff from Earth, not that synthesized crap from the mess hall. It's going to be a long night. As Sarah disappeared into the medical bay, already barking orders at the stunned Vexillian medical staff, Commander Jackson turned to Admiral Cathex with what he hoped was a sympathetic expression. Don't feel too bad, sir. She does this to everyone. Last month she made a Rigelian High Counselor cry because he suggested human medical practices were primitively invasive. Though in fairness, she did fix his crystalline matrix degradation afterward. The Admiral's scales were slowly returning to their normal blue, though there was still a distinctly greenish tinge around the edges. I don't understand. In all my years of service, I've never encountered a civilian who would... Yeah, that's the thing about human doctors, Steve said, leaning against the wall. They're technically civilians, but they operate on this whole other level of authority. It's like they've got their own chain of command that occasionally intersects with military hierarchy, usually by running right through it. But how do you maintain order? How do you prevent chaos? Kethex asked, genuine distress in his clicking voice. Steve laughed. Prevent chaos? Admiral, human doctors thrive on chaos. They're basically chaos wizards with medical licenses. The rest of us just try to stay out of their way and hope they remember to be gentle when it's our turn for a physical. From inside the medical bay came the sound of Sarah's voice. No, that's not where the liver is. At least not in humans. And for the love of all that's holy, who organized these surgical tools? This looks like a game of pin the scalpel on the trauma kit. Perhaps, Admiral Kethex said slowly, we should review our protocols regarding medical authority. Probably wise, Steve agreed, though you might want to wait until after Doc Chen's finished saving Lieutenant Rodriguez, and maybe after she's had her coffee. She's significantly more diplomatic when properly caffeinated. Commander Jackson! Sarah's voice cut through the air like a laser scalpel. Either find me that coffee or get in here and help me explain human circulatory systems to people who think we keep our hearts in our knees. Steve straightened up immediately. Sorry, Admiral, duty calls, and trust me, that is a duty call. Doc's orders trump yours right now. As he hurried off to find the nearest coffee source, Steve could have sworn he heard the Admiral mutter something that his translator rendered as chaos wizards with medical licenses. No wonder they survived first contact. 3 days later, a fully recovered Lieutenant Rodriguez was discharged from the medical bay, though not before Sarah had thoroughly revised the station's entire emergency response protocol and reorganized their medical supply system. The Vexillian medical staff had started taking notes on her methodology, particularly after she demonstrated 17 different ways to use standard medical supplies as improvised emergency tools. Admiral Kethex had taken to avoiding the medical wing entirely, his scales turning a fascinating shade of mauve whenever someone mentioned Dr. Chen's name. However, he had officially updated the station's command protocols to include a new section on human medical authority, which the other alien species had quickly adopted after witnessing Sarah in action. The new protocols included such gems as human medical personnel are to be considered equivalent to flag officers in matters of patient care, regardless of civilian status. The term doc is to be treated as both a title of respect and a warning. Coffee supplies are to be maintained at minimum 200% normal levels when human medical personnel are aboard. In the event of disagreement with human medical authorities, defer to their judgment, and pray they are merciful. Sarah had framed a copy and hung it in her office, right next to her medical degree, and a sign that read, I know over 7,000 ways to save your life. Don't make me demonstrate the other things I learned in medical school. The Joint Species Council, upon reviewing the incident, simply added a footnote to their first contact protocols. Warning: human medical professionals operate outside standard command structures. Do not attempt to prevent them from treating patients. This is for your own safety. When asked about the incident later, Sarah just smiled and said, Sometimes you have to be a little forceful to save lives. Besides, I didn't even have to use the Latin. The Admiral's scales still turn purple whenever someone mentions Latin. You want me to what? Dr. Sarah Chen stared at Commander Jackson with the kind of expression usually reserved for patients who claimed WebMD told them they had Martian slug fever. Teach a seminar, Steve repeated, trying not to wince under her gaze. The Joint Species Council thinks your unique approach to medical authority could benefit other stations. They want you to train both human and alien medical staff on cross-species emergency protocols. Sarah took a long, deliberate sip of her coffee, the good stuff, straight from Earth, because nobody had forgotten that lesson from last month's incident with Admiral Kethex. Let me get this straight. The same council that sent me 3 strongly worded messages about diplomatic concerns after I reorganized the Vexillian medical bay now wants me to teach others how to do exactly what they complained about. Well, Steve coughed. They've revised their position since the efficiency reports came in. Turns out your aggressive reorganization improved emergency response times by 340%. The Arcturians are particularly interested in your methods. The Arcturians? Sarah's eyebrows shot up. The same ones who think hierarchy is literally written into their DNA? Apparently, they were very impressed by how you handled the plasma burn incident. They've been studying the security footage. There's footage? Sarah's eyes narrowed. Of course there's footage. Please tell me it hasn't gone viral on the Xenonet. Steve's sudden fascination with the ceiling tiles told her everything she needed to know. Fantastic, Sarah muttered. I suppose that explains why 3 different species have started bringing coffee as a peace offering whenever they visit medical. She sighed, setting down her mug. Fine, but I have conditions. The council anticipated that. They've authorized me to accept any reasonable requests. First, I want full authority to reorganize any medical bay I'm teaching in. Can't demonstrate proper emergency protocols in a facility that looks like it was organized by a drunk octopus. Granted. Second, I want Lieutenant Rodriguez as my assistant. He's got first-hand experience with cross-species medical emergencies, and the Vexillians respect him since he survived their idea of quarantine protocols. He'll be thrilled. He's been bragging about being your success story to anyone who'll listen. Third, Sarah's smile turned predatory. I want Admiral Kathy X to attend the first session. Steve choked on his own coffee. The Admiral? But his scales still haven't fully recovered their color from last time. Exactly. He's a perfect example of how not to handle a medical emergency. Plus, I think it'll be educational for everyone to see that rank doesn't matter when someone's bleeding out. You just want to make him uncomfortable, don't you? I have no idea what you're talking about, Sarah said innocently, reaching for her tablet. Now let me show you my preliminary curriculum. I'm calling it Emergency Medicine, Why Human Doctors Don't Care About Your Chain of Command. The first seminar was scheduled for the following week aboard the Arcturian diplomatic vessel, Logic's Mandate. Sarah arrived early, accompanied by Lieutenant Rodriguez and 3 anti-grav units loaded with what she called essential teaching supplies, and what Steve suspected was enough coffee to fuel a small army. The Arcturian medical bay was exactly what you'd expect from a species obsessed with hierarchy. Every instrument was arranged by size, every cabinet labeled with precisely 17 different priority levels, and every staff member wore badges indicating their exact position in the medical chain of command, down to the 4th decimal place. Sarah took one look at it and started twitching. Right, she announced to the assembled alien medical staff. Lesson 1. In an emergency, this, she gestured at the meticulously organized room, is worse than useless. Rodriguez, simulate a plasma burn victim. Jackson, start a timer. Let's see how long it takes them to locate and retrieve the necessary equipment. What followed was 15 minutes of increasingly frustrated Arcturian medical officers trying to navigate their own organizational system, while Sarah watched with the patient expression of a teacher waiting for students to realize why their approach to a math problem wasn't working. 17 minutes and 23 seconds, she finally announced. Your patient would be dead. Twice. From his position on the examination table, Rodriguez nodded solemnly. Can confirm. I only survived because Dr. Chen reorganized the Vexillian medical bay in under 3 minutes, while simultaneously yelling at an admiral. The Arcturian chief medical officer's antenna twitched in distress. But the system is perfectly logical. Everything is in its designated place according to hierarchical importance. Hierarchy doesn't mean shit to a severed artery, Sarah replied, rolling up her sleeves. Watch and learn. What followed was what Steve would later describe in his report as controlled medical chaos. Sarah transformed the pristine medical bay into what looked, to the horrified Arcturians, like complete disorder. But when she ran the emergency simulation again, Rodriguez's plasma burn was treated in under 2 minutes. But how? The chief medical officer's antennae were practically tied in knots. This defies all logical organization. No, Sarah corrected. It defies your logic. Emergency medicine isn't about hierarchy. It's about efficiency. Every second counts, which means the most commonly needed equipment should be the most accessible, regardless of its status in your system. From his position near the back of the room, coincidentally closest to the exit, Admiral Kethex's scales shifted to a now familiar shade of purple. I can attest to the effectiveness of Dr. Chen's methods. See? Sarah beamed. Even the Admiral learned. Eventually. Now, who wants to learn about human triage protocols? Fair warning. They involve completely ignoring rank and treating the most critically injured first, even if they're the lowest-ranking person in the room. The Arcturian medical staff looked scandalized. Their antennae all twitched in perfect synchronization. Oh, and one more thing. Sarah added, pulling up a familiar document on the main display screen. Everyone should familiarize themselves with Section 47B of the Interspecies Medical Treaty. It's basically your get-out-of-hierarchy free card when someone's trying to pull rank during an emergency. Is that the regulation you quoted when Admiral Cathex began? When I ignored your orders and saved Rodriguez's life? Yes, though technically I didn't need it. Human doctors operate under an even older authority, the Hippocratic Oath. We swear to do no harm, but more importantly, we swear to let nothing stand in the way of helping those who need us. Not rank, not protocol, not even well-meaning but misguided admirals. And if someone tries to stand in your way? One of the Arcturian junior medical officers asked. Sarah's smile could have cut diamond. Then they learn why human medical schools also teach us several thousand ways the body can break. We just choose not to use that knowledge, usually. The rest of the seminar proceeded with a mixture of practical demonstrations, emergency simulations, and what Steve was pretty sure were carefully disguised lessons in civil disobedience. By the end of the week, the Arcturian medical bay had been completely reorganized. The staff had learned to reach for supplies without checking their priority classification first, and Admiral Cathex had only turned purple twice. More importantly, the Arcturian medical staff had started showing signs of what Sarah called healthy medical autonomy, and what their commanding officers called disturbing independent tendencies. When an actual emergency occurred, a diplomatic aide suffering from an allergic reaction to Terran shellfish, they treated the patient immediately, instead of waiting for authorization from their superiors. The patient survived, and Sarah looked like a proud parent watching their child take their first steps. See, she told Steve later, reviewing the incident reports. All they needed was permission to ignore permission. The Joint Species Council might regret asking you to teach these seminars, Steve mused. You're basically starting a revolution in alien medical practices. Sarah just smiled and sipped her coffee. Good. Maybe next time I won't have to threaten an admiral to treat a patient, though I'll miss seeing Cathex turn purple. Speaking of the admiral, Steve checked his tablet. The Rigelians have requested you for their next medical training rotation. They specifically asked if you could bring him along as a demonstration subject. Really? How thoughtful of them. Sarah's grin would have made a shark file for retirement. I suppose I could prepare a special lecture on human medical authority, a case study in admirals learning their place. Somewhere on the station, Admiral Cathex felt his scales begin to change color and didn't know why. The revolution in interspecies medical practices had begun, and it was wearing a white coat, carrying a coffee cup, and had absolutely no respect for military hierarchy. The galaxy would never be the same. Nobody really expected the pirate attack. In retrospect, Sarah would later reflect, that was probably why it happened. She was in the middle of explaining to a group of horrified Rigelian medical officers why human doctors sometimes had to literally break bones to set them properly, when the first explosion rocked the station. Coffee cups rattled, instruments clattered, and Admiral Cathex's scales shifted through 3 different shades of alarmed before settling on a particularly nauseating shade of puce. Well, Sarah said, catching her tablet before it could slide off the podium. Looks like we're moving on to the practical portion of today's lesson. Everyone remember where the emergency supplies are? The Rigelian doctors' crystalline sensory arrays all chimed in perfect harmony, their species equivalent of nervous laughter. This is not a drill, the station's AI announced, its usual calm voice somehow managing to sound annoyed. Station has been breached by unauthorized vessels. Security protocols are now in effect. All non-essential personnel please proceed to designated shelter areas. Medical staff to emergency stations. Sarah was already moving, her hands flying over supply cabinets she'd reorganized just days before. Right, you've all memorized the new emergency protocols. Fan, Yang, take the East Wing. Rodriguez, you're with me in Central Medical. Rigelian team, your crystalline structures make you resistant to plasma burns. I want you handling any injuries near engineering. And somebody get me a status report before I have to go looking for it myself. The various medical teams scattered with impressive speed, though whether motivated by the emergency or fear of disappointing Dr. Chen was up for debate. Doctor, Admiral Cathex began, his translator struggling to keep up with his agitated clicking. Regulations state that in case of hostile action, all civilian personnel must... Sarah didn't even look up from her medical kit. Admiral, what did we learn about trying to give me orders during a medical emergency? Cathex's scales rippled in resignation. That it is inadvisable and potentially hazardous to one's health and dignity? Gold star! Now make yourself useful and help Rodriguez carry those trauma kits. And try not to turn that particular shade of purple again. It clashes with the emergency lighting. The first casualties arrived before they'd even finished setting up the emergency triage area. Most were security personnel with plasma burns and impact injuries, though there was one very confused-looking Vexillian engineer who'd apparently tried to headbutt a pirate and discovered that human skulls were harder than expected. I don't understand. One of the Rigellian doctors chimed as they treated a human guard's broken arm. The pirates disabled our communications. How are all the medical teams coordinating so effectively? Sarah grinned as she sealed a plasma burn. Remember yesterday's lesson about human medical professionals having our own command structure? Well, we also have our own communication methods. Watch and learn. She straightened up and bellowed. I need 3 units of synthetic blood, and somebody better have started a new pot of coffee. Within 30 seconds, both requests had been fulfilled, even though normal communications were down and the replicators were offline. But how? The Rigellian's crystals sparkled in confusion. The first rule of emergency medicine, Sarah explained while administering pain medication, is that doctors and nurses always find a way to communicate. The second rule is that we run on coffee and spite, and we're all out of coffee. As if to punctuate her point, another explosion rocked the station. Status report, Sarah shouted. East wing secure, came Dr. Fan's reply from somewhere down the corridor. Minor injuries only. Someone tried to shoot Dr. Yang, but apparently didn't realize Kevlar is standard in medical uniforms these days. Engineering reports minimal casualties, one of the Rigellian doctors chimed. Pirates seemed surprised by crystalline doctors who could walk through plasma fire. Central Medical holding steady, Rodriguez called out, though we could use some help with incoming. Sarah turned just in time to see 3 figures burst through the medical bay doors. They were wearing the mismatched armor typical of space pirates, and their weapons were pointed at, well, everything. Nobody move, the lead pirate announced in badly accented standard. We're taking control of this medical facility. Sarah looked at the pirates, then at her patients, then at her half-empty coffee cup. She sighed. Rodriguez, she said calmly, please remind our visitors about the station's updated medical protocols. Rodriguez grinned and pointed to the framed document on the wall. The one Sarah had made after the plasma burn incident, specifically Section 4, Paragraph 2. The pirates squinted at the text, their translators working overtime. In the event of disagreement with human medical authorities, defer to their judgment and pray they are merciful. The lead pirate read aloud. What's that supposed to? He never finished the sentence. Sarah's coffee cup hit him squarely between the eyes with surgical precision, spraying hot coffee across all 3 pirates' face shields. What followed was what Commander Jackson would later describe in his report as a masterclass in why you don't mess with medical professionals. Sarah moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who regularly had to deal with uncooperative patients, using a combination of medical knowledge and what looked suspiciously like martial arts to disable all 3 pirates in under 10 seconds. You know, she commented while zip-tying the unconscious pirates with surgical tubing. Most people think first do no harm means we're pacifists. They forget that sometimes you have to cause a little harm to prevent a lot more harm. She looked up at the wide-eyed Rigellian doctors. That's lesson 23, by the way. Write that down. Is that really in the medical training curriculum? Admiral Cathex asked faintly, his scales cycling through colors faster than a malfunctioning mood ring. Oh, honey. Sarah patted his arm condescendingly, leaving a coffee-stained handprint on his ceremonial armor. There's so much they don't teach in basic first contact courses about human medical training. Did you know we have to learn every bone in the body, not just to heal them, to know exactly how they break? The Admiral made a sound that his translator couldn't process. The station's security forces finally managed to repel the pirate attack about an hour later, only to find that most of the real action had happened in and around the medical facilities. Between Sarah's impromptu coffee cup artillery, the Rigellian doctor's casual strolls through plasma fire, and what Dr. Yang had apparently done to a pirate with nothing but a tongue depressor and creative application of anatomical knowledge, the medical team had captured more pirates than security had. I don't understand, the pirate captain complained later, while Sarah treated the coffee burns on his face. We disabled communications, locked down key systems. How did you coordinate such an effective resistance? 2 things, Sarah replied, perhaps applying the burn ointment a bit more firmly than strictly necessary. First, never try to control a medical bay run by human doctors. We're basically chaos entities with medical licenses and a very strict ethical code about when we're allowed to use our powers for evil. And second, never, ever get between medical staff and their coffee supply during an emergency. That's just asking for trouble. She smiled sweetly. Now, this might sting a bit. I'd say I'm sorry, but I took an oath against lying to patients. The Joint Species Council, upon reviewing the incident, added another amendment to their first contact protocols. Warning: human medical facilities are to be considered sovereign territory during emergencies. Do not attempt to seize control of medical bays, interfere with medical personnel, or disrupt coffee supplies. Failure to heed this warning may result in intimate demonstrations of human anatomical knowledge. They also approved Sarah's request for upgraded coffee makers in all medical facilities under her jurisdiction. Some battles, they decided, weren't worth fighting. You know, Commander Jackson said later, reviewing the security footage, I think you might have actually traumatized those pirates more than you did Admiral Cathex. Sarah just smiled and sipped her coffee from a new, reinforced titanium cup. Good. Maybe next time they'll think twice before interrupting my lectures. I hadn't even gotten to the part about how humans can survive with only one kidney yet. Is that relevant to emergency medicine? It is when I'm explaining to pirates why they should cooperate with medical staff. She paused thoughtfully, though I suppose I could have led with the appendix instead. People get nervous when you start listing all the organs they don't strictly need to survive. Somewhere in the brig, several pirates felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, and so another chapter was added to the growing legend of human medical authority in space. The pirates would eventually be turned over to proper authorities. The station's security protocols would be updated to include coffee maker status as a critical system, and Sarah's training seminars would become required attendance for all species medical staff. Admiral Cathex even managed to stop turning purple every time someone mentioned medical protocols, though he did develop an interesting twitch whenever he heard the words, coffee break. The message that arrived at Station Medical wasn't particularly unusual, except for the fact that it came from the Zorblaxian Hive Queen herself. This would have been more impressive if Sarah hadn't been elbow-deep in reorganizing the station's xenobiology reference database at the time. Another request for medical training seminars? She asked, not looking up from her tablet where she was correcting what appeared to be the 57th incorrect entry about human digestive systems. Tell them I'm booked through next quantum cycle, and somebody please update these references. Humans cannot, in fact, digest plasma conduit insulation, no matter what that incident report from engineering suggests. Commander Jackson cleared his throat. Not exactly. The Zorblaxians want you to mediate a diplomatic summit. Sarah's stylus clattered to the floor. They want me to what now? Mediate. Apparently, word of your unique approach to authority has spread. The Hive Queen specifically requested, and I quote, the human medical authority who does not recognize traditional power structures and speaks truth to admirals. Oh God, Sarah groaned. The coffee cup incident got out, didn't it? It's required viewing in 3 different species diplomatic training programs now. The Arcturians are using it as an example of efficient conflict resolution through targeted beverage deployment. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who'd been pretending not to eavesdrop while organizing medical supplies, snorted. Better than what the Regellians are calling it. Their diplomatic academy listed it under why human medical personnel are technically classified as strategic assets. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. So, let me get this straight. The Zorblaxians, the same species that has 17 different words for hierarchy, and considers their queen's sneeze to be a religious experience, want me to mediate a diplomatic summit? Well, Steve shuffled uncomfortably. You did successfully teach their medical staff to ignore rank when treating emergencies. They seem to think you can apply the same principles to diplomatic negotiations. I threw coffee at pirates. Technically, you also reorganized 3 different species medical protocols, revolutionized emergency response procedures across known space, and made Admiral Cathax turn new and interesting colors. The Joint Species Council considers you something of an expert in cross-species organizational reform. Sarah stared at him for a long moment. The Council approved this, didn't they? Enthusiastically. They're calling it medical diplomacy. Of course they are. She sighed, reaching for her coffee cup, the reinforced titanium one that had become something of a legend in its own right. Fine, but I have conditions. When don't you? First, I want Rodriguez and the full medical team with me. If I'm going to commit diplomatic malpractice, I want witnesses. Granted. Second, I want unlimited coffee supplies. The good stuff, not that synthesized nonsense. Already arranged. The Zorblaxians added a coffee clause to the preliminary diplomatic protocols. Sarah blinked. They what? After reviewing the station security footage, they classified coffee as a critical diplomatic resource and strategic medical supply. There's a dedicated cargo hold for it on the diplomatic vessel. Huh. Sarah looked impressed, despite herself. Maybe they're learning. Third condition. I want Admiral Cathex there. Steve choked on his own coffee. The Admiral? Why? Haven't you traumatized him enough? He's my success story. Living proof that even the most rigid hierarchical thinking can be overcome with proper motivation and creative application of medical authority. She paused. Plus, I want someone there who already knows to duck if I reach for my coffee cup. You're enjoying your reputation way too much, you know that? My dear Commander, Sarah smiled sweetly. I'm a human doctor in space. If I don't lean into the terrifying reputation, what's even the point? The diplomatic summit was scheduled for the following month aboard the Zorblaxian diplomatic vessel. Hierarchical Harmony. A name that Sarah found hilariously ironic given the circumstances. The ship itself was a marvel of organic technology, grown rather than built, with corridors that seemed to pulse with life and rooms that responded to the occupants' pheromones. It also had the best coffee maker Sarah had ever seen outside of Earth, which immediately improved her opinion of Zorblaxian engineering. The situation is complex, the Zorblaxian diplomatic attaché explained during the preliminary briefing. Their mandibles clicked anxiously as they pulled up a holographic display. 3 different hive clusters are claiming the same resource-rich asteroid field. Traditional hierarchy would dictate that the eldest queen's claim takes precedence, but that would lead to economic disaster for the younger hives and potential violent conflict, Sarah finished, reviewing the data. And since traditional medical protocols would have let Lieutenant Rodriguez die, you're hoping I can help find a similarly unconventional solution here. Precisely. The attaché's antennae wiggled in relief. The Queens respect your demonstrated ability to bypass hierarchy in favor of practical solutions. They believe you can help find a resolution that preserves both resources and dignity. Sarah took a long sip of coffee, considering. Tell me something. In Zorblaxian medical facilities, how do you handle multiple critical patients when resources are limited? We treat the highest-ranking patient first, of course. And how's that working out for your survival rates? The attaché's mandibles clicked uncomfortably. Not optimally. Right. Sarah set down her cup with purpose. First lesson in human emergency medicine. Triage isn't about rank. It's about need and efficient resource allocation. Maybe we should apply the same principle here. What followed was 3 days of what could only be described as medical diplomacy, Terran style. Sarah approached the territorial dispute like a mass casualty event, treating each hive's economic needs as critical injuries that required immediate attention. Look, she explained to the assembled queens, gesturing at the holographic asteroid field. You're all approaching this like it's a hierarchy problem. It's not. It's a resource management problem, just like in an emergency room. You don't let patients die because they're not high-ranking enough to deserve treatment. You find a way to allocate resources so everyone survives. But tradition dictates, the eldest queen began. Tradition dictated that I shouldn't countermand an admiral's orders, Sarah interrupted, causing Admiral Cathex's scales to preemptively shift color. Would you like to know how many lives we've saved since ignoring that particular tradition? The queen's antennae all twitched in unison. A gesture Sarah had learned meant intense interest. Consider this. Instead of one hive claiming the entire field, what if we treated it like organ donation? Multiple recipients, carefully matched to ensure maximum compatibility and benefit. Organ donation? The youngest queen's mandibles clicked rapidly. You suggest we share resources? I suggest you save 3 patients instead of letting 2 die to fully treat 1. Sarah pulled up new data on the display. Look at these distribution models. If you divide the asteroid field based on each hive's specific resource needs, rather than arbitrary territorial rights, you actually increase overall efficiency by 47%. The queens studied the data, their compound eyes reflecting the holographic projections. It's unorthodox, the middle queen admitted. So is performing emergency surgery in a maintenance corridor during a pirate attack. But sometimes unorthodox is what keeps people alive. Sarah smiled. Though I promise not to throw coffee at anyone during these negotiations unless absolutely necessary. Admiral Cathex, who had been quietly trying to blend into the background, made a sound that his translator rendered as a nervous whimper. To everyone's surprise, except perhaps Sarah's, the negotiations succeeded. The asteroid field was divided based on each hive's specific resource requirements, with overlapping zones designated for cooperative mining efforts. The solution was unprecedented in Zorblaxian history, yet somehow made perfect sense when presented in terms of medical resource allocation. "You know," Commander Jackson said later, reviewing the final treaties, "I think you might have accidentally invented a whole new field of diplomacy." Sarah snorted into her coffee. "Please, I just applied basic emergency medicine principles to politics. Treat the most critical problems first, ignore rank when it gets in the way of solutions, and always have coffee ready for the inevitable complications. The Joint Species Council is already getting requests from other species for similar mediation services." "Of course they are," Sarah sighed. "Fine, but I'm going to need a bigger coffee cup." The success of the Zorblaxian negotiations led to a new amendment in the interspecies diplomatic protocols. In situations where traditional hierarchy impedes practical solutions, consider consulting human medical authorities. They excel at ignoring rank in favor of results. Warning: ensure adequate coffee supplies before initiating consultations. Sarah framed this document too, hanging it next to her growing collection of protocol amendments and what was now officially recognized as a diplomatic incident coffee cup. Admiral Cathex, upon reviewing the new protocols, simply nodded and ordered his staff to install emergency coffee makers in all diplomatic meeting rooms. Some lessons, he'd learned, only needed to be taught once, preferably without beverage-related incidents.